On November 10, 1942, in the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, a single breath of warm air leaked from the cracked lips of a man buried beneath a collapsed wall. The temperature hovered below -20 degrees Celsius, and the wind pushed fine dust and powdered cement through every shattered window frame. The man did not move. His gloved finger rested lightly on the worn wooden stock of a Soviet Mosin Nagant Model 1891-30 rifle. The rifle was fitted with a simple PU scope, mounted slightly off-center. Its glass was fogged at the edges, its metal scraped by days of hard use. But the man behind it knew every flaw intimately. The man was Senior Sergeant Vasily Zaitsev. At that exact moment, across the blasted courtyard of a former workers' housing block, a German sniper was waiting too. He had been sent to kill the man the Wehrmacht called the White Death of Stalingrad's East Bank. His real name was unknown, his exact location was uncertain, but his mission had been repeated so often among the German infantry that no one doubted it. Find Zaitsev, eliminate him, restore movement to a sector frozen by fear. Inside this mile-wide slice of Stalingrad, dozens of German soldiers had been cut down in the past week alone. Many had been killed at distances they thought were safe. Others had been hit the very moment they exposed themselves for half a second. German units had complained that the entire line near Mamayev-Kurgan and 9th January Square had become impassable during daylight. Every ruined window, every gap in a factory wall, every cratered rooftop felt like it hid a single patient hunter. In a way, they were right. It did. Zaitsev's reputation spread with every confirmed kill. 225 enemy soldiers had already fallen to his rifle by early November. Many of them were regular infantry. Some were machine gun crews. A smaller number were German snipers. Each death amplified the myth. And myths have consequences on battlefields. German officers noticed movement slowing in their ranks. Report after report warned that exposure for even 1 or 2 seconds near certain positions meant death. Something had to be done. By early November, German commanders began bringing in specialized marksmen to hunt him. These counter-snipers were well-trained, experienced, and equipped with high-quality rifles and scopes. They were told one thing: neutralize the threat. But the threat was not just a man with a rifle. It was a hunter raised in the wilderness of the Ural Mountains, a sailor turned infantryman, a man whose childhood taught him that patience and silence were not skills, but survival. On this cold morning, the German sniper facing him had taken up a position 3 days earlier. He never fired a shot. He waited, convinced he had finally discovered the faint pattern behind Zaitsev's attacks. The German believed he could predict the Soviets' next appearance. He had studied the landscape, the angles, the past kills, the bullet impacts on walls. He thought he was prepared, but Zaitsev was already watching. The ruins of Stalingrad were not a battlefield for those who relied on doctrine alone. They rewarded the silent, the still, the unconventional. German snipers relied on the precision of their optics. Zaitsev relied on experience from a childhood spent hunting wolves, foxes, and deer across wide Siberian terrain. That difference shaped the fate of countless soldiers. On this morning, there was not yet a shot. Only tension. Only 2 marksmen waiting across a dead city that had once held 500,000 people. The Germans had come to hunt a single Soviet sniper. But in the next hours, the man they hunted would change the rules of the entire sector, and in the days that followed, their hunt would become something else entirely. It would become a contest not just of accuracy, but of survival, willpower, and psychological dominance. What happened next would be remembered not because it was witnessed, but because the results were undeniable. In this place, one man's skill forced an entire army to rethink how to fight in a destroyed urban maze. Before that moment arrives, before the shot that breaks the deadlock, the story must turn backward. To understand how a shepherd boy from Siberia became the most feared sniper in Stalingrad, one must return to the early life that shaped his instincts. The Ural Mountains in the first decades of the 20th century were not gentle. Winters were long and harsh. Food was often scarce. Every family depended on hunting to survive. In this world, young Vasily learned to fire a rifle before he was 12. Accuracy was not a hobby, it was a necessity. A missed shot meant a lost meal. A poor decision meant a wasted cartridge, and ammunition was never plentiful. He learned to judge wind by the movement of grass. He learned to track by the bent angle of a twig. He learned that the most important skill of a hunter is to wait longer than the prey. These lessons followed him into adulthood. When the Second World War broke out, Zaitsev was serving with the Soviet Navy as a clerk in the Pacific Fleet. He was not on a ship firing torpedoes. He was not in an elite Marine division. He was sitting at a desk. But he watched the news of the Nazi invasion sweep across his country. He read the casualty reports. He heard the descriptions of battles in the West. He saw comrades deploy westward while he remained behind, far from the fighting. It did not sit well with him. He submitted request after request to be transferred to the front. Each request was denied. The Soviet military needed clerks too, and he was a reliable one. But as the fighting reached the Volga, the need for infantry became desperate. Casualties mounted at unprecedented rates. Entire units were destroyed within weeks. The Soviet command began pulling reinforcements from every branch, including the Navy. Zaitsev was among those reassigned. He arrived in Stalingrad as a member of the 1047th Rifle Regiment, 284th Rifle Division, under the command of General Vasily Zaitsev of the 62nd Army. The city he entered was unrecognizable from the photographs shown before the war. Entire districts were leveled. Factories lay in ruins. The Volga River delivered reinforcements under continuous artillery fire. German bombers had reduced the city to a smoking shell of broken stone. But the chaos of the environment was ideal for someone with Zaitsev's background. It was a hunter's terrain, filled with concealment and angles, shadows, and traps. When he first arrived, he did not serve as a sniper. He carried a standard infantry rifle and fought in brutal close range combat. But with every engagement, his commanders noticed his accuracy. One recorded that Zaitsev rarely missed a shot, even under heavy fire. After several days of combat, he was handed a sniper rifle recovered from a fallen comrade. From that moment on, the pace of his kills increased rapidly. But the real transformation came when he began training others. His methods were simple but effective. Snipers did not hide in obvious positions. They created empty positions as decoys. They used pieces of cloth to attract attention. They fired only when absolutely necessary. They aimed not at soldiers who were crouching or protected, but at officers, machine gunners, and radio operators. Zaitsev taught his students to think like hunters, not soldiers. Their task was not to fire many shots. Their task was to fire the one shot that changed the battle. This training had an immediate impact. German reports from late October and early November noted a surge in sniper activity across multiple blocks of the front. Entire platoons stalled because they lost key personnel within minutes. German snipers sent to counter the Soviets were often eliminated before they found their targets. And in one of the most dangerous sectors, Zaitsev was responsible for many of these kills. By early November, his presence had become a strategic concern for the Germans. The Wehrmacht's 6th Army was locked in a struggle for control of the city. Every street, building, and trench mattered, and in key areas, movement became impossible during daylight. German commanders concluded that snipers were disrupting operations. Among all Soviet snipers, one name appeared repeatedly: Zaitsev. Plans were drafted to neutralize him. The Germans brought in experienced snipers from other fronts. They altered patrol routes. They studied the terrain. They tracked bullet trajectories. They used spotters. They shifted their own snipers to deeper firing positions for safety. And they waited for Zaitsev to make a mistake. He did not. Instead, he studied them. He recognized patterns in how German snipers entered and exited positions. He learned how they avoided detection. He identified the soft sounds their scopes made when adjusting. He even detected their preferred distances. Many German marksmen trained to fire at long range using powerful optics. But in Stalingrad, long range often did not exist. Urban combat forced distances to shrink to 50 meters, 20 meters, sometimes even less. In this environment, Zaitsev's natural instincts gave him the advantage. He relied little on his scope. He used it only when necessary. Many times, he aimed with iron sights, trusting his ability to judge distance and movement through instinct alone. The scene returns now to that cold morning of November 10th. The German sniper still held position, hidden in a structure that once sheltered factory workers. He believed he had built the perfect trap. But in fact, Zaitsev had already identified his position. A faint glint of light on the third morning had given away the location. Zaitsev did not fire immediately. He did not want the German to relocate. He wanted him to remain confident, to stay still, to stay predictable. That patience defined his success. 20 minutes passed in silence. 30 minutes. A shift of shadow gave Zaitsev a clearer look at the German position. The moment had come. What happened next would mark the beginning of a sequence of events that pushed German command to take even more drastic measures. Some of these measures were documented clearly. Others were described only in memoirs, passed down through testimony, their full details still debated today. But one thing is certain after this morning: the hunt for Zaitsev escalated into something far more dangerous and far more personal. The next shot in this story has not yet been fired. But when it is, it will change everything. The shot that broke the stillness of the morning on November 10th echoed through a district already shattered by months of artillery. It came from Zaitsev's position, and it was followed by nothing. No second shot, no movement, no adjustment, only silence. Across the courtyard, the German sniper who had tried to anticipate Zaitsev's pattern slumped forward, the back of his helmet touching the cold concrete behind him. His rifle slid from his grip as his body settled into stillness. The infantry nearby did not immediately understand what had happened. They were accustomed to sudden deaths in this part of the city. But later, when the position was inspected, it was clear that the German sniper had died instantly. His eye had barely been on the scope when the bullet struck. The kill was clean, precise, and absolute. This was the moment the Germans realized that their situation was deteriorating faster than their reports suggested. They had lost yet another specialist, and the man responsible was only becoming more accurate with each engagement. After this event, Zaitsev's commanders took note. His success was not simply a product of skill. It was the result of method, patience, and an understanding of terrain that few shared. General Vasily Chuikov, commander of the 62nd Army, paid close attention to these patterns. Chuikov knew that snipers were becoming a critical asset in the battle for Stalingrad. Ammunition was scarce. Supplies were inconsistent. Reinforcements crossed the Volga under constant artillery fire. Every bullet had to count. Zaitsev's bullets counted more than most. Chuikov issued orders to expand sniper operations. Zaitsev was tasked not only with eliminating enemy snipers but also with training others. He accepted the responsibility without hesitation. His sniper school took shape within days. It was informal, built inside damaged buildings, abandoned trenches, and half-collapsed shelters. But it worked. Zaitsev's methods were straightforward. He taught students to observe longer than they aimed. He emphasized choosing positions that created ambiguity for the enemy. The goal was not simply to hide but to confuse. A sniper should not appear to be anywhere specific. He should appear to be everywhere. This training produced immediate results. German patrols reported taking fire from multiple directions in the same sector. Their spotters could not identify whether they were facing one sniper or several. The uncertainty itself became a weapon. German machine gun crews learned to fire cautiously. Officers hesitated to expose themselves. Radio operators changed positions frequently. The pressure mounted. By mid-November, German leadership began developing plans to stabilize the affected sectors. They believed that if they could neutralize the Soviet snipers, their infantry would regain the freedom to maneuver. But in this effort, they misunderstood the nature of the threat. They believed the problem was a small group of highly skilled marksmen. In reality, they were facing a coordinated network of snipers trained in Zaitsev's style. The Germans attempted to adjust their tactics. They changed the angles of their positions. They deployed additional spotters. They used smoke to obscure movement. They even attempted deception by placing mannequins near rubble to draw fire. These methods occasionally worked, but not often enough. The Soviets adapted faster. The Germans did not know that Zaitsev studied their countermeasures. He watched how they shifted under pressure. He noted the timing of their movements. He tracked how long it took for them to respond to an apparent threat. His conclusions were simply the Germans followed doctrine too rigidly. They relied on predictable responses. They used established templates. And in Stalingrad, templates were death sentences. Over the next weeks, Zaitsev and his students took advantage of every German habit. German snipers frequently chose elevated positions because they were trained to seek long lines of sight. Zaitsev instructed his men to aim at windows on the second and third floors because that was where German marksmen tended to be. German spotters often appeared moments before their snipers adjusted position. This made spotters easier targets. German officers moved with characteristic caution, often hugging walls in ways that exposed part of their helmets. Each of these details mattered. As Soviet sniper activity increased, German losses grew. The Sixth Army recorded unusually high casualties among officers in certain sectors. Machine gun nests disappeared within minutes of revealing themselves. Attempts to suppress Soviet sniper positions with artillery often failed because the Soviet positions were so shallow, shifting, or camouflaged that locating them became nearly impossible. The ruins of Stalingrad became a labyrinth of hidden firing points, each selected with the eye of a seasoned hunter. The Germans responded by bringing in even more experienced snipers from other fronts. These men had fought in forests, fields, and hills, but few had experience in a city like this. They were used to distance. They relied on glass and steel. They believed in precise execution. None of them were prepared for Zaitsev's approach, which required intuition as much as training. In late November, the number of German snipers sent into Zaitsev's sector increased sharply. Some reports suggest that more than a dozen were deployed specifically to counter Soviet marksmen. Their presence was felt immediately. Zaitsev noticed an increase in aimed incoming fire. His students reported close encounters. A few Soviet positions were nearly compromised. German marksmen began shifting faster, using rubble for concealment, and firing from unexpected angles. The German approach was becoming more dangerous. Zaitsev adapted again. He created a tactic that became known among his students as the three-position rule. It involved establishing 3 firing points: 1 primary, 1 decoy, and 1 fallback. The decoy position was partially exposed, designed to draw enemy fire. The fallback position was built for escape and survival. The primary position was the actual point of engagement. The Germans often targeted the decoy, revealing their own locations. This tactic saved lives and cost the Germans valuable time and personnel. The battle for Stalingrad continued to escalate. Snow began falling, covering rubble, bodies, and equipment in a thin white layer that sometimes hid, but often revealed. A single footprint could give away a position. A patch of disturbed frost could expose a sniper's nest. Zaitsev used these details carefully. He instructed his students to approach firing points from the side rather than from behind. He advised them to use cloths or branches to cover their tracks. He reminded them that in this city, the smallest detail could mean survival. By early December, the situation reached a critical turning point. German high command realized that their attempts to suppress Soviet snipers were failing. Reports described entire units immobilized for hours or days because of sniper pressure. German leadership concluded that a more drastic solution was needed. They believed that if they could eliminate Zaitsev himself, the Soviet sniper network would lose its most valuable asset. This belief was both logical and flawed. Logical because Zaitsev was indeed the most skilled and dangerous sniper in the sector. Flawed because his teachings had already spread far beyond his own rifle. It is in this context that the most debated element of the story emerges: the arrival of an elite German sniper whose identity has remained uncertain for decades. Soviet accounts names him as Major Erwin Koenig, reportedly a highly trained instructor from a German sniper school. German records do not confirm his existence. Some historians believe he was real but recorded under a different name. Others argue he may have been a composite figure. Regardless of the uncertainty, the story of his arrival reflects a real escalation in the German response. They did dispatch elite marksmen to eliminate Zaitsev. That part is not in dispute. What follows blends documented reality with elements of testimony and memoir. It represents the 5 to 10% of the story that cannot be verified with absolute certainty, though it aligns with the nature of the conflict. According to Soviet accounts, this new German sniper was sent with a specific mission. He was to find and eliminate Zaitsev, restoring freedom of movement to German units and reducing the fear that had begun to paralyze troops in certain sectors. The hunt that followed would become the most dangerous period of Zaitsev's time in Stalingrad. For the first time since he arrived, he faced an opponent whose skills approached his own. The streets of the city became the arena for a duel that combined instinct, patience, and psychological warfare. The Germans believed that the elimination of this one man could shift momentum. The Soviets understood that Zaitsev's survival was essential to maintaining pressure on their enemy. What followed would unfold slowly, over days, without witnesses. Across a landscape of shattered stone and twisted steel, it would become the most famous sniper duel of the Second World War, even as its details remained partly obscured by time. But before the first move was made, Zaitsev had to locate his hunter, and in Stalingrad, finding a single skilled marksman hidden within miles of ruins was one of the most dangerous tasks a sniper could attempt. The search for the German sniper who had been sent to kill Zaitsev began quietly. There was no formal announcement, no confirmation from headquarters, no clear identification. There was only a shift in the air that experienced men felt before they could explain it. Zaitsev sensed it first through a series of subtle changes. German movements slowed in ways that felt deliberate rather than fearful. Shots came from angles where none had been before. The patterns were different. The enemy was probing, studying, observing. This was not the work of regular infantry marksmen. Someone on the other side was hunting with intention. Zaitsev understood immediately. He had hunted enough predators in his youth to recognize when he was no longer the hunter, but also the prey. He did not panic. He did not change positions recklessly. He simply sharpened his awareness. The ruins of Stalingrad had taught him that survival depended on attention to the smallest detail. A fragment of dust stirred by a rifle barrel. A patch of snow slightly melted by body heat. A shadow that held still for too long. These signs were subtle, but they were enough. Zaitsev began by mapping the German lines in his mind. He noted every position from which fire had recently come. He studied the angles, the geometry, the distance between cover points. He observed how German infantry reacted under pressure. He watched how long it took for their movements to resume after a shot. The clues were faint, but they formed a pattern. Whoever was hunting him was disciplined, precise, and patient. This was not an inexperienced marksman hoping for a lucky shot. This was someone who understood the art of the hunt. The first true indication of the enemy's presence came when one of Zaitsev's students narrowly avoided death. The student had risen for less than a second to reposition his rifle. The shot that passed inches above his head was fired with exceptional timing. The angle was unexpected. The location was well chosen. Zaitsev examined the trajectory with care. The bullet's path aligned with a cluster of ruins near a damaged metal grain silo. The position was dangerous and exposed, yet perfect for someone who knew how to use shadows and wreckage to their advantage. Zaitsev spent the next several hours studying the area. He used multiple vantage points, shifting slowly and silently through rubble. He never revealed himself. He never rushed. His instincts guided him. He understood that this duel would not be won by speed, but by patience. A single misstep would be fatal, not only for him but for the snipers he trained. He felt the weight of responsibility. His survival mattered not just for his own record but for the morale of the entire 62nd Army. His commanders, his students, and the infantry in his sector depended on him. As he continued to search for signs of the enemy sniper, Zaitsev realized that his opponent was using a technique known as masking. Masking involved choosing positions that blended with shadows and debris so effectively that the sniper's body outline became part of the terrain. Only a trained observer could detect it. Zaitsev focused on areas where lines did not seem natural. A small slope where there should have been a straight plane. A dark patch where sunlight should have reached. A reflective surface where nothing reflective should have remained. These small anomalies guided him. The duel officially began when Zaitsev spotted a faint glimmer near the grain silo at dusk. It was not the glint of a scope directly. It was the shine of light bouncing off metal deep within shadow. It was enough. He knew that a skilled sniper would never expose his scope. But even the best could not fully control the surrounding environment. Zaitsev retreated to a safer angle and began planning. Over the next day, both snipers tested each other without firing direct shots. Each movement was calculated. Each shift in rubble was a message. Each disturbance of dust was a question. Zaitsev understood that his opponent was skilled enough to wait days for one perfect opportunity. He matched that patience. He did not rise from cover. He did not scan with visible movement. He allowed his eyes to adjust naturally to the changing light. Hours passed with no resolution. The front line around them continued its brutal rhythm. Artillery shook the city. Machine guns rattled. Infantry fought in rooms, staircases, and basements. But for the two snipers, none of this mattered. Their world had narrowed to a few meters of rubble. The battle was not measured in advances or retreats. It was measured in breaths. On the second day of the duel, a Soviet soldier attempting to carry ammunition to a forward position was shot from a long distance. The wound was fatal. Zaitsev studied the angle again. The shot came from the same direction as before. It was clean, decisive, and perfectly timed. He had no doubt now. This was the enemy sniper sent to eliminate him. Zaitsev's partner, Nikolai Kulikov, accompanied him during these days. Kulikov was one of his most skilled students, experienced enough to assist without compromising the operation. Zaitsev trusted him. Kulikov helped watch for movement while Zaitsev analyzed terrain. The two men worked silently, communicating through gestures and instinct rather than speech. Their cooperation was seamless. Zaitsev began constructing a more detailed plan. He estimated the enemy sniper's likely firing points. He calculated angles across debris fields. He considered how the sun's position changed during the day. He predicted where shadows would fall at different hours. He studied how the wind funneled around damaged buildings. Each of these factors shaped the final engagement. The terrain between them was complex. The enemy sniper had chosen a nest concealed by a metal sheet partially buried under debris. It was not a traditional sniper hide. It was a trap designed to confuse observers. The Germans relied on structure and elevation. This opponent relied on camouflage and misdirection. It was a sign of exceptional skill. Zaitsev recognized the danger immediately. Attacking such a position required precision. A direct approach could expose him. He needed a way to force the enemy to reveal himself. He considered creating a decoy. He rejected the idea. The enemy was too skilled to fall for a crude distraction. Instead, Zaitsev and Kulikov spent an entire day analyzing how the light changed near the metal sheet. As the sun moved, reflections shifted. The sheet occasionally caught a faint glow. This was the key. On the third morning of the duel, Zaitsev and Kulikov took positions behind a destroyed mortar emplacement. It provided minimal cover but an ideal angle. They waited silently as dawn approached. The cold was severe. Frost formed on their clothing. Breath became visible. Zaitsev ignored discomfort and focused on the metal sheet. Hours passed before anything happened. The city around them roared with distant combat, but the duel remained silent. Then, as the sun cleared a gap in the horizon, a faint line of light passed across the sheet. It revealed a shape behind it. Not much, just a subtle distortion. But enough. Zaitsev remained completely still. He knew the enemy sniper was watching too. He waited for the moment when the light shifted again. It came slowly. Another glimmer bounced off the sheet. This time the angle was wider. This was the moment Zaitsev had anticipated. He carefully adjusted his rifle, minimizing all movement. The metal sheet flickered again. In that instant, Zaitsev understood what he was seeing. The reflection was not random. It was bouncing off the enemy sniper's scope tube. The sniper had been forced to adjust slightly to track Zaitsev's sector. That adjustment revealed him. Zaitsev fired. The shot struck the metal sheet, punching through it. The German sniper behind it did not have time to react. Zaitsev waited several seconds, watching for any movement. There was none. Kulikov remained alert, scanning for a counterattack. But silence held. The duel had ended. Later, when the position was reached, Soviet troops found a body behind the metal sheet. The sniper had been killed instantly. His rifle lay beside him. His gear was of high quality. His appearance suggested experience and training. But his identity was never definitively confirmed. Some Soviet reports named him as Major Erwin Koenig. Others identified him differently. German records do not list a Koenig of such rank serving as a sniper instructor. Historians remain divided. Some believe the story was embellished. Others argue that the sniper was real but recorded under another name or rank. What is certain is that a highly skilled marksman had been sent to eliminate Zaitsev. That marksman died in this duel. With the enemy sniper defeated, German movement in the sector became cautious again. The fear that Zaitsev inspired returned stronger than before. His victory in this duel, verified or not, had tangible effects on morale. Soviet troops grew more confident. German units grew more hesitant. The psychological impact was profound. In the days that followed, Zaitsev resumed his work. His sniper school continued training new marksmen. His own record continued to rise. He remained a constant threat wherever he operated. But the duel had taken its toll. The intense focus cold, and pressure weighed on him. Yet he continued. Only a severe injury would eventually remove him from the front. But that moment had not yet arrived. For now the hunter had survived the hunt, and the legend of Zaitsev, already growing, began to spread beyond Stalingrad. The duel began quietly, so quietly that most soldiers in the sector had no idea a contest of patience and precision had already started. It unfolded across a piece of ground that would have seemed insignificant to anyone not trained to notice how terrain bends light, shapes shadow, and reveals or hides a sniper's presence. The combat zone was a ruined industrial district marked by broken chimneys, collapsed walls, and a frozen earth churned into ridges by explosions. This section of Stalingrad, near the factories and rail lines leading into the city's heart, had already cost thousands of lives. Now it was becoming the center of a quieter, but far more focused confrontation. The Soviet command believed an elite German sniper had been sent to kill Vasily Zaitsev. They believed this because Soviet scouts had intercepted reports of a skilled marksman moving through the German Sixth Army's front line, studying angles, range markers, and ballistic signatures left on the bodies of Soviet soldiers. A pattern emerged in those injuries. Each shot entered at a near-perfect angle. Each placement designed to minimize sound and ensure the victim fell without alerting others. These were not the characteristics of average riflemen. Soviet officers suspected a professional, a master trained beyond the ordinary standards of Wehrmacht infantry. Whether or not he held the name later recorded in Soviet accounts did not matter as much as the fact that someone extremely dangerous was now active in the city. Zaitsev noticed the change before anyone told him. He could feel the difference in how German fire behaved. The usual hurried shots that cracked along the rubble-filled streets had shifted into something slower and more deliberate. He found signs of someone studying him, not firing wildly. Empty cases were positioned with intention. Firing holes were concealed in ways that suggested strategic design rather than improvised opportunism. There was intelligence and discipline behind the muzzle flashes coming from across the battlefield. The duel began on a cold morning with light drifting through the ruins like powdered glass. Zaitsev moved with careful restraint, accompanied by his spotter, Nikolai Kulikov. Their eyes scanned every fractured wall and every darkened window. They looked for anything that seemed slightly wrong, anything that did not match the natural flow of debris or the expected decay of the ruined structures. Snipers see landscapes differently. Where ordinary soldiers see rubble, snipers see airflow angles and lines of sight. The German sniper was already in position. He had chosen a hide that exploited a collapsed metal sheet and a partially buried bunker. From that vantage point, he could observe the Soviet movements with minimal exposure. His skill was evident immediately. Several Soviet snipers had already been lost to this unseen marksman. Their bodies were found with single, carefully placed shots. Their positions had been discovered even though they had been considered safe. Zaitsev recognized the signature of a patient, competent hunter. For 2 days, neither side revealed themselves. They maneuvered through silence, each man waiting for the other to make the first mistake. Ammunition was conserved. Movements were measured in millimeters. Even breaths were controlled, released slowly to avoid fogging optics in the freezing air. The quiet was not peaceful. It was an oppressive stillness built on the expectation that death might come from any direction and without warning. On the 3rd day, the stalemate shifted. Zaitsev studied a section of ground where a corpse lay half, buried in snow and debris. Something about the position bothered him. The body looked too conveniently placed. It had not frozen naturally into the rubble. The posture suggested intention. The Germans may have used it as bait. Zaitsev watched the ground beyond it, then studied how the light fell against the surface of a metal sheet beside a destroyed bunker. There was a faint glint, almost invisible, catching the edge of morning brightness. It was not the reflection of a rifle scope. It was the subtle shine of something man-made placed where it did not belong. That meant a firing slit was hidden behind it. He understood immediately. The German sniper was using the sheet as a concealment device, masking the hole through which he observed the Soviet sector. It was clever. The angle of the sheet disrupted shadows and made the opening nearly impossible to detect. Only an observer with exceptional fieldcraft would notice it. Zaitsev realized he had found the man who had been eliminating Soviet marksmen one by one. He needed confirmation without exposing himself. He signaled to Kulikov with minimal movement. Together they prepared a decoy. A simple helmet raised slowly above cover could draw fire. It was one of the oldest tricks in sniper warfare. But against an expert opponent, even this required precision. The helmet rose gradually. Not suddenly, not dramatically. Only enough to allow a distant observer to believe a head might be beneath it. A single shot rang out. Sharp. Clean. It struck the helmet with exact placement. The force knocked it back down into the rubble. The German had revealed his firing line, but only for an instant. It was enough. Zaitsev already had his rifle angled toward the suspicious sheet of metal. He did not aim at the opening itself. He aimed at the edge where the faint glint had appeared, calculating where the German's eye must have been positioned. He inhaled, steadied the reticle, and fired. His shot punched through the concealment. There was no immediate movement afterward. No return fire. Only stillness. Kulikov and Zaitsev held their position. Minutes passed with no sign of life in the enemy hide. When the Soviet infantry later advanced across that section, they found the German sniper's body behind the metal sheet, positioned exactly where Zaitsev had calculated it would be. The weapon lay beside him. The shot had been fatal. Whether the man carried the name Kiornig or held the rank later attributed to him remains unverified. German records do not confirm a major by that name serving as a counter-sniper in Stalingrad, but Soviet accounts consistently describe the presence of an elite German marksman sent to hunt Zaitsev. The duel itself became part of the city's legend, repeated by survivors who fought alongside him. To them, it symbolized the moment when the enemy's most skilled hunter was outmatched by a man who had learned to track wolves, deer, and distant movements across Siberian snow long before he ever held a military rifle. When word of the duel spread through Soviet lines, it raised morale in a way few victories could. Soldiers in trenches and basements spoke of it with quiet pride. An enemy that had seemed nearly invincible was shown to be vulnerable. Among German forces, the death of such a skilled shooter contributed to the psychological wear that was already beginning to fracture their endurance in the city. In battles where snipers shaped the tempo of urban combat, even a single elimination carried weight far beyond the number of bullets fired. The duel marked a turning point in Zaitsev's campaign. He had outlasted and outperformed an enemy who matched him in skill and patience. In the ruins of Stalingrad, where death came from every direction, he had proven that mastery of the terrain, discipline, and instinct could overcome even the most highly trained opponent. This moment became one of the most repeated episodes of his wartime record. Whether every detail was exact or whether some pieces became enhanced through the retelling, the core event was accepted by those who fought there. It was recorded in Soviet reports and woven into memoirs by men who saw the battlefield with their own eyes. With the duel behind him, Zaitsev continued his work. Stalingrad still needed every skilled marksman it could field, and he remained relentless. His tally grew, his reputation expanded, and the Germans, who had once hoped to neutralize him by sending their best, now faced a sniper whose confidence had only strengthened. The duel did not end the battle, but it defined the psychological war within the ruins. A conflict where the hunter and the hunted sometimes exchanged roles in a single heartbeat. After the duel, Zaitsev continued to operate with a sense of sharpened awareness. Each day in Stalingrad was a test of endurance, not only against the enemy but against the city itself. The cold stiffened joints, the smoke from ruined factories burned throats, and exhaustion dragged at every movement. Yet he remained on the front line, training new snipers while continuing his own missions. His tally climbed steadily, surpassing 200 confirmed kills before the battle neared its conclusion. Those he trained became an extension of his eyes and instincts. They learned to read wind through drifting ash, to judge range by the sound of footsteps on different rubble surfaces, and to blend into the frozen earth until even trained observers failed to notice them. By the end of the battle, Zaitsev's students had eliminated thousands of enemies. Their effectiveness created a multiplier effect far greater than any single sharpshooter could accomplish alone. This was the quiet power of mentorship in war, one man passing on knowledge that might save dozens of lives and shift the balance in contested streets. But the city continued to demand a price. In late January 1943, near the end of the German Sixth Army's collapse, Zaitsev's luck faltered. A mortar exploded near his position, and fragments tore into his face. The blast blinded him. For a man whose skill depended entirely on vision, the injury could have marked the end of his service. He was evacuated through a medical corridor established as the Red Army tightened its hold on the city. Surgeons worked to save his sight. For days he could see nothing but darkness and flickers of indistinct shape. The battle raged on without him. Soviet forces encircled the remaining German units. Frostbite, starvation, and relentless pressure wore down the enemy. As February arrived, the last pockets of resistance crumbled. The Battle of Stalingrad had lasted months, consumed hundreds of thousands of lives, and reshaped the course of the war. The city was an unrecognizable labyrinth of ruins. Among those ruins, the legend of a calm-voiced Siberian hunter who had neutralized dozens of enemy snipers continued to circulate long after the shooting stopped. Zaitsev's recovery turned into its own kind of triumph. Under the care of ophthalmologist Vladimir Filatov, his sight was restored through a series of delicate procedures. The resilience that had carried him through freezing hunts in Siberia and rifle duels in Stalingrad now guided him through the slow process of healing. When his vision returned, he rejoined the front. His war did not end with the city that had defined his name. He fought in other operations and continued to serve until the war's final phase in 1945. When the fighting in Europe ended, Zaitsev carried with him memories of a city reduced to ash, comrades lost one by one, and the intense mental demands of sniper warfare. He returned to civilian life with the same quiet discipline he had shown in the field. He worked in the Soviet Navy's factory system in the years following the war. His contributions were known, but not widely publicized outside military circles. In the post-war world, stories of individual soldiers often became overshadowed by sweeping narratives of victory and reconstruction. For decades, the details of his sniper operations remained in military archives and veterans' accounts. Only later did foreign audiences begin to study what had happened in the shattered streets along the Volga. Historians examining Soviet records found the documentation of kills, the training program he built during the battle, and the accounts of duels with German marksmen. The duel with the elite sniper became one of the most discussed episodes, both celebrated and scrutinized. Some questioned the exact identity of the German adversary, pointing to gaps in archival material. Others accepted the story as a reflection of the psychological warfare that unfolded inside the ruined city. Whether every detail aligned perfectly with later memoirs mattered less than the underlying truth. German forces made serious attempts to eliminate him, and he outmaneuvered those attempts. The numbers associated with his service remained striking. 220, 5 confirmed kills during Stalingrad alone. Over 3,000 enemy casualties inflicted by the snipers he trained. More than 5 Soviet snipers developed under his guidance. In historical assessments, these statistics placed him among the most effective marksmen of the Second World War. Unlike some wartime figures whose reputations were complicated by propaganda or disputed claims, Zaitsev's record was supported by documents written during the battle itself. Yet his story was never solely about numbers. It was about the transformation of a shepherd from the Ural Mountains into a soldier whose instincts and discipline shifted the dynamics of urban warfare. It was about the contrast between official expectations and battlefield reality, where innovation and fieldcraft often surpassed rigid doctrine. Some of his methods, such as using multi-layered camouflage to mimic the city's debris fields or adjusting firing angles based on ricochet patterns, did not come from textbooks. They came from studying nature, wildlife, and terrain long before he wore a uniform. His legacy shaped sniper doctrine for decades. Soviet and later Russian training systems incorporated elements of his techniques, emphasizing patience, concealment, and environmental awareness. Western militaries studying urban combat scenarios also referenced his methods, particularly regarding decentralized sniper teams. The city that had once threatened to swallow him became the source of lessons applied far beyond the Volga. As for recognition, he received the title Hero of the Soviet Union, one of the nation's highest honors. Yet outside the USSR, his name remained largely unknown until the late 20th century. Documents were translated, memoirs published, and films inspired by the battle introduced audiences to fragments of his story. Some portrayals added fiction, combining characters or amplifying specific episodes for dramatic effect. But beneath those creative interpretations, the core reality remained. During one of the most brutal confrontations in modern history, his skills helped shape the outcome of crucial engagements. Zaitsev lived until 1991. He died at the age of 76, having spent his later years in a quieter world far removed from the echoing halls of ruined factories and shattered apartment blocks. Decades after the battle, officials fulfilled his final wish. His remains were interred at Mamayev Kurgan, the high ground where he had once fought, and where a memorial to the defenders of Stalingrad now stands. The city he helped defend had changed, rebuilt into a modern landscape, but the ground beneath it still held the history he had shaped. Historians studying his life found the story not through rumor, but through documents, testimonies, and preserved records. The narrative of the shepherd turned sniper emerged piece by piece, reconstructed from wartime logs and interviews with surviving veterans. This research revealed a pattern familiar in military history, extraordinary contributions made by individuals whose broader recognition came only long after the battles were over. What stands out in the end is how a man who preferred solitude and silence became one of the most influential figures in sniper warfare. His journey from a remote Siberian valley to the center of one of the 20th century's most decisive battles demonstrated how innovation and instinct could arise from unlikely origins. His success was not built on superior equipment or specialized training before the war. It arose from understanding the land, studying movement, and approaching each decision with deliberate patience. His story continues to resonate because it shows how small actions, repeated consistently and executed with precision, can shape the course of conflict. One man lying motionless in snow-covered rubble, observing patterns and waiting for the right moment, influenced the tempo of a battle fought by hundreds of thousands. The duel that became legend symbolized more than a contest between two marksmen. It represented a confrontation between opposing doctrines, between rigid structure and adaptive fieldcraft, between theory and instinct. Now, decades later, the lessons remain relevant. In studying Zaitsev's actions, one sees a reminder that innovation often comes from unexpected sources. Leaders appear not only through formal channels, but through individuals who adapt to challenges with clarity of thought and calm execution. His story stands as a reflection of how determination, skill, and patience can shift outcomes far beyond the immediate moment. This is how the Germans tried to hunt him, and how they became the hunted instead. For more such videos, subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching the video.